Copenhagen, Denmark, October 1st, 2025. As leaders from across Europe gathered in Copenhagen for a high-stakes summit, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen opened the proceedings with a firm warning aimed at Moscow. She accused Russia of waging a campaign to destabilize European unity and vowed that the European Union would not allow such efforts to succeed. Standing before an audience of heads of state, ministers and journalists, von der Leyen underlined the pattern she says the EU has seen over the last several years. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, said, "It's a recurring pattern, and this pattern is coming from Russia. And so far, Russia tries to test us, but Russia also tries to sow division and anxiety in our societies. We will not let this happen." Her opening remarks set the tone for a summit that European officials described as pivotal, not only for Europe's approach to Ukraine's war effort, but also for the continent's own resilience against hybrid threats such as disinformation, energy pressure and cyber attacks. In her speech, von der Leyen drew a direct connection between the Kremlin's political tactics and the divisions emerging within some EU countries. She argued that Moscow's goal is to weaken Europe from within by stoking fear, spreading misleading narratives and exploiting political debates. Ursula von der Leyen emphasized, "We know these tactics. We have seen them before and we are seeing them again. But Europe has learned and Europe will stand together." The Commission President reminded leaders that similar tactics had been documented around election periods and major policy decisions in recent years. She credited European institutions for building tools to counter disinformation and urged member states to step up their own vigilance. Throughout the opening session, the theme of unity dominated discussions. Leaders from Denmark, Germany, Poland and the Baltic nations all underscored that internal cohesion was as important as military or financial aid to Ukraine. In a closed-door segment later in the day, diplomats said several leaders privately expressed concerns about domestic political fatigue over the war and the rising cost of energy. Von der Leyen responded by insisting that wavering now would play directly into Moscow's hands. One EU official paraphrased her message, "If we let Russia exploit our debates to fracture our unity, we risk far more than higher gas bills. We risk our shared security and democratic future." The two-day summit in the Danish capital convened as Ukraine's armed forces continued their push to hold strategic eastern front lines while also facing relentless Russian missile and drone strikes. European leaders came to Copenhagen not only to reaffirm support for Kyiv, but also to discuss measures to harden their own societies against outside manipulation. Officials said the agenda included plans for an expanded EU-wide hybrid defence initiative, coordination of cybersecurity investments, and new funding mechanisms for media literacy programmes. They also weighed proposals for a joint procurement scheme for critical defence technologies. A senior Danish diplomat told reporters that the aim was to move beyond reactive measures and build a more systemic shield against interference campaigns. Von der Leyen, who has often spoken about the role of digital platforms in spreading false narratives, called for deeper cooperation with tech companies and stricter enforcement of the EU's Digital Services Act. Ursula von der Leyen stated, "Free speech is a cornerstone of our democracies, but lies designed to destabilize our societies are not protected speech. Platforms have a duty to remove disinformation that is part of foreign interference." She also highlighted the importance of sustained investment in independent journalism across Europe, describing it as the first line of defence against propaganda. Beyond the information battlefield, the summit devoted time to discussing Europe's energy transition and the vulnerabilities created by past reliance on Russian gas. Officials reported that leaders agreed to accelerate joint energy security projects and to keep emergency reserves stocked at higher levels through the coming winter. Von der Leyen reminded participants that Europe's recent success in cutting dependence on Russian fossil fuels demonstrated the power of collective action. She argued that the same spirit was needed to meet the financial challenges of sustaining support for Ukraine. While the summit focused on resilience and unity, several leaders also addressed the broader geopolitical stakes. They warned that allowing Russia to succeed in Ukraine would embolden other authoritarian powers to test the resolve of democratic nations. Von der Leyen's message was particularly blunt in this regard. Ursula von der Leyen warned the cost of division today will be far higher than the cost of solidarity. We must not give Russia the satisfaction of seeing us falter. Observers in Copenhagen said her tone reflected a growing sense among European policymakers that hybrid threats, from cyber attacks to election meddling, are now a permanent feature of the security landscape. As the first day of the summit drew to a close, leaders prepared for detailed negotiations over funding commitments for Ukraine's defence and reconstruction. Behind the public speeches, officials worked late into the evening to reconcile differing national positions on how much more aid each member state could contribute. Yet even as these debates continued, diplomats said there was broad consensus on the need to stay united against Russian pressure. Von der Leyen's warning about division resonated with leaders from countries as diverse as Portugal and Finland. A Nordic official commented on the sidelines, "Everyone understands the stakes. If we splinter, we lose leverage and we invite further aggression." The summit's final communiqué, expected later in the week, was likely to emphasise a long-term commitment to countering Russian aggression and strengthening the EU's democratic foundations. Draft language seen by reporters referred to defending Europe's open societies against hybrid threats and pledged new funding for both defensive technologies and civic education initiatives. As she left the plenary hall for a series of bilateral meetings, von der Leyen told journalists that Europe's response to Russian tactics must remain consistent and principled. She promised that the EU would continue to share intelligence and work with allies in NATO to expose and counter foreign interference. For all the focus on Russia, European leaders also recognised that their unity message had to resonate with their own citizens. Several heads of government plan to return home after the summit with joint announcements on energy security, cyber readiness, and support for communities affected by the economic ripple effects of the war. The Copenhagen summit, therefore, was not only about confronting an external adversary, but also about convincing ordinary Europeans that their leaders have a coherent strategy to defend both security and democratic values.
Is a pattern, and this pattern is coming from Russia insofar as Russia tries to test us, but Russia also tries to sow division and anxiety in our societies. We will not let this happen.